Well, hi, everybody. Welcome back to the Christian Capitalist Podcast. We're so glad to be joined today by Greg Smith, who is from London, England, and the first guest here on the Christian Capitalist Podcast from across the pond in Great Britain. We're so glad you're able to join us, Greg, today. Welcome.
Oh, I'm very excited. Thanks for inviting me, Rich.
It's my pleasure. Y'all, I was able to meet Greg when Rebecca and I, as many of you know from our social media posting, as Rebecca and I traveled to London back at the beginning of December. The very first person that we met and got a chance to interact with was Greg, because he took us on a tour of London on the afternoon when we first arrived. We went all over London after landing at Heathrow Airport and spending the entire night in an airplane. And so we're just so glad to get a chance to talk with you, Greg, and get to learn more about your story and your walk in faith through your work. So tell us a little bit about where you live and what you do for a living.
Yeah, so I am in London, but I'm on the very outskirts, northeast London, and I'm a London taxi driver. And I've been a London cabbie for 27 years. Just back on the 2nd of Feb was my 27th anniversary.
Congratulations.
Yeah, we call it the cabiversary.
I love that.
And then on top of having the knowledge to drive the streets and apply for hire and take people where they want to go, back in 2017, I also retrained in the tour guide business. And then again in COVID, I took another exam, a slightly higher qualifications in tour guides, in particular for the City of London.
So that's a lot of training for most Americans. When we think of a cab, we're thinking of a yellow vehicle. In New York, they used to be 50s related kind of cars. Nowadays, in New York City, in particular, in Chicago, there are a lot of Toyota Priuses. What's a London cab look like, and what does it take to become a taxi driver in London?
Yeah, so to be a licensed cab driver, where you're able to pick people up off the street, i.e., somebody puts their hand up and you pull over. You drive a purpose-built vehicle. It's like it's like a people carrier, I guess, is the best way to describe it. All of the passenger seats are in the rear. There's no seats in the front, and there is a partition between the driver and the passengers. But to get to that stage, you can only become a licensed taxi driver by learning something called the knowledge. Now, the knowledge is where you learn a book of runs that has been passed down through the ages of time that are very regular routes that people take. So that's your starting process. There's 400, they're called runs. So you learn the 400 runs from A to B. You learn all of the points at the pickup point at A and all of the points of interest at the drop-off at B. So that could be somebody standing outside a police station. Can you please take me to another police station? I need to go to a different police station. Or somebody's come out of a library and they're going back to the station. But you need to know those. So there's roughly 25,000 streets and 15,000 places that somebody might want to go to. So that's the knowledge. You learn that over a process. It can take anywhere between 2.5, 3 years to 4 or sometimes 5 years for some people.
Unbelievable. And I just can't help but think, Greg, that for modern minds, like our children, Rebecca and I, as you know, are in our early 50s, and our kids are now all in their 20s. For kids who barely know how to read a map and live off of GPS, having that kind of knowledge in your mind is really, it's got to be difficult for them to imagine that you can remember all of that. That's amazing.
Yeah, totally. And, even recently, time and time again, the cabbie's brain has been proved to be better than the maps, the digital and the AI maps. Still, because London is not, like built on blocks and a grid, east, west, north, south. The roads go in all directions.
Isn't that funny? Well, and I got to say, it's so important to recognize that bias is everywhere, right? I'm strongly biased in favor of people, not machines. So I love that the cabbies are beating the AI. That's awesome.
Yeah, absolutely.
So, Greg, just to finish the thought on describing a cab, so many of us in America think of a cab as yellow, but cabs in London look much different, don't they?
They do. Traditionally they're black, and still a high proportion of them are black. But, the commercial world has crept in the last few years. So you get cabs with adverts on the side or all over, which they call a full livery.
Hmm.
And people wanted different colours. Now, I'm a bit of a traditionalist, and I think that, changing the colour from black dilutes our public image, our PR. So I think they should all be black. All the buses should be red. All of the post boxes should be red. Yeah,
Right.
but that's just me.
And the one phone booth outside of Parliament that everybody takes their picture of in front of on TikTok, right?
Yeah, yeah, because
Um,
you get the Big Ben in the background as well as the phone booth.
Exactly. So, Greg, I have to agree with you as a traditionalist myself. The black cab is kind of synonymous, just like the double decker red bus. And I have
Yeah,
to say, having ridden in just the space of the week that we met you in December in a New York cab and a London cab, I strongly prefer the London cabs.
yeah,
As you know, and many of our listeners know, I'm 6'4". My
yeah,
wife is 5'11". The London cab was spacious. We had plenty of
yeah.
room in the back to sit out
That's
and
great.
stretch our
Yeah,
legs. It beats a
yeah,
yellow Prius in Times
yeah.
Square.
I'm sure.
Hey, so what made you want to go into the cab driving business in the first place? What you just
Uh,
told us is it took a lot of commitment to get to the point where you were able to become
yeah,
licensed in the first place.
yeah, true. I mean, a lot of cab drivers, it stays within the family. So a lot of cab drivers have got fathers and grandfathers that have been cabbies, and my father was a cab driver. I did work in real estate from leaving school, and I worked my way up in that business. But when it came time to, hopefully getting a manager's role and a branch of my own, it wasn't quite happening for me. And so that's when I looked elsewhere, and I thought, well, yeah, my dad's a cab driver. Maybe I'll give this a go. And it was
Hmm.
as simple as that.
I love it. Give it a go. And
Yeah,
so, and now you've just celebrated your cabiversary. I love that.
yeah,
So it seems to me with the knowledge that it takes for 25,000 streets and 15,000 places that it's just a matter of time before you start pointing things out as you're driving along. And that's how we met you, not just riding in your cab, but having a tour of London. So
yeah.
what made you kind of want to take that next step that obviously requires a lot more dedication and study?
Yeah, I realised that I was taking a lot more interest in London and the buildings and the history, and cab driving is it's a you're a self-employed person, you can suit yourself, but can also be a little bit boring on some sides, because you get a lot of business people, they're straight on the cell phone, you're not really interacting, you're just going from A to B. Whereas when you start talking about the buildings and the places and the people and the history, you're having a lot better human interaction, and time is just more enjoyable.
Absolutely. Well, and I have to say that your black cab, as traditional as it was also innovative because you have that beautiful skylight that allows
Yeah, it
people to
was
see
really.
up as you're driving around the buildings. Well,
Yeah,
most people in America, when we think of London, think of the royals, right? Uh, Charles and the family, right, and William and Kate and all of that. They think of Westminster Abbey and the Big Ben in Parliament, but there's a whole lot more to London than just those things. Can you give
yeah,
us, because Rebecca and I, for example, when we stopped there by the River Thames to
yeah.
see that kind of memorial that commemorated London's 2,000 years, can you give us a little sense of in very broad terms, the history of London? I think most people would be amazed to
Yeah,
know how old it is.
yeah, sure. Well, you mentioned the Thames there, Rich, and of course, a lot of people say London's river, the River Thames. Well, that's not really accurate because the Thames was there for millennia before London. So actually, the River Thames has a town called London by the side of it. The river came first.
Yeah.
It's the oldest name in London, along with Kent, a place on the south coast, the south of the River Thames. And then the Romans come along in the year roughly 43 AD. And by 50 AD, they've got a bustling city right there where the financial district is today. And that is the City of London, a separate city within the place that we call London.
Hmm.
There's also a separate city called Westminster. And just very crudely, the difference is there's the City of London is the trading and the financial, and the City of Westminster are the royals and the government, the people that run the whole country for us.
Gotcha. And so London and Westminster are right across the river from each other. Is that right?
Yeah, well, they're on the same side of the river, but they're
Oh,
right.
okay.
They're sort of, yeah, they're on the same side of the river.
I see. Gotcha. It's easy. I mean, listen, I was there for a week. It's easy to get confused.
Yeah, yeah,
Right. That just underscores the knowledge that you have. All right. So just to recap then, so the Romans built the very first kind of established there that became London over time in the year 50. So let's call it almost 2,000 years ago. That's
yeah,
amazing. That's
correct.
amazing.
Yeah, and the good thing is we've still got pieces of architecture from every era going right back to the Romans. So, we've got sections of the Roman wall. We've got a piece of the amphitheatre, a section of the amphitheatre below ground. So we've got architecture all the way back to 2,000 years.
Isn't that something? And so, what for your average American listener for our show today? What are
Yeah,
some of the kind of the high points of British history? I mean, we talked about 1066 and what an important year that was, but that's a
yeah,
thousand years after the Romans showed
yeah,
up. It's hard to
yeah,
believe.
yeah, yeah. Well, so 1066, yeah, the Norman king, William the First or William the Conqueror, conquers the land. And actually, London for about 300 years is under kind of French language and French rule, French law
Wow,
and French language.
wow.
But we get the next big thing I might say is the year 1215, which was Magna Carta.
Hmm.
This great seal that was sealed by King John, which protects people and actually introduces inheritance and the right to a fair trial by your peers. Whereas prior to that, the king could just deem you guilty, no trial, and off you're gone, and he'll take all your property and all your horses and the whole, shebang.
Yeah,
So,
yeah.
yeah,
And let me tell you, for Americans, that Magna Carta is something that kids learn about in the history books. And even today in Washington, D.C., in our archives, there's a copy of the Magna Carta because it was so important for the Declaration of Independence and the Constitution.
right.
Which reminds me, Greg, this is something that I didn't get a chance to ask you in December or forget about. Sitting here in 2025, how does your average person from London view people from the United States? Is there still this kind of rivalry that came from the revolution now almost 300 years ago?
I
Or is it more friendly than that?
I don't see that. No, I don't see that,
Good.
Rich. I think we're buddies. We're buddies. We're very similar people.
Yeah.
We're all, we're good people, hardworking people, family people. So, when I'm doing these tours, I've got to say 90% of the people I meet are from the United States.
Really?
Uh,
Interesting.
yeah, and we get on like a house on fire. We're very similar people, I think, the Brits, or especially Londoners, maybe.
Yeah, exactly, exactly. Well, and so because it is very much an international city, I remember as we were walking along in front of Westminster Abbey, we took a moment to just listen and heard at least 10 different languages
Yeah,
spoken by the people that walked by.
yeah,
Um,
yeah.
and Great Britain and the United Kingdom is very much an international place these days because of
Oh,
the
yeah,
number of people that are moving there, and really the nature of the Commonwealth is global in many
yeah.
ways. Greg, that kind of gets me to my next question for you. What as a cab driver and a tour guide, what are some of the things that most people who are listening to our show who haven't been to London, and you say, okay, now I've heard this, I've heard Greg's voice, I'm inspired to go visit. What are some of the things that they should look to see that they may be popular, or maybe some things that if you really want to know London, you ought to check this out?
Yeah, I mean, especially on your first visit, you're going to want to see the big main sites that you've heard about and read about. And so you've got the Houses of Parliament, you've got Big Ben, which I must add while we're talking is the bell inside the tower. So that tower is actually called the Elizabeth Tower, and the
Oh,
bell inside it is Big Ben.
okay.
Right next to that, you've got Westminster Abbey with, this is a church with 1,000 years of history. And it's the Royals Church. It's known as a Royal Peculiar. So Charles III is the head of that church, not the diocese that it actually sits in.
Hmm.
So that's a
Isn't
little
that
bit different,
interesting?
maybe to the States.
Yeah, yeah, because the here the separation of church and state is one of the foundation principles of American government, but there is much different, right? The head of the government is also the head of the church.
Yeah, I suppose you could say that. Yeah, although he's the monarchy and he's the sovereign. But yeah, yeah. And then if you go over to the financial district, you've got St. Paul's Cathedral. Now
Hmm.
that's slightly different because that's where the big state ceremonies take place. So, Westminster Abbey are the royal ceremonies and St. Paul's Cathedral are the state ceremonies. So, I'm just thinking of like the Queen, our late Queen Elizabeth, she had a 80th birthday, Thanksgiving service at St. Paul's.
Oh, okay.
Um, yeah. Yeah. So, and then, you're going to want to see the Tower of London, Tower Bridge, which some people get mixed up with London Bridge. So London Bridge is a very plain, simple, functional bridge. Tower
Mhm.
Bridge is the one with the big towers and the steel arms, sweeping arms, right
Right.
next to the Tower of London.
The one
Tower of
that
London,
everybody gets their picture taken in front of, right?
yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I mean, I think it's something like 3 million people a year walk across the bridge.
So one of the questions that, as we talk about the church for the state and the church for the royals, one of the things that just fascinates me about the relationship between America and England is how much Americans love the royals. There are
Yeah,
magazines, Talking About You People magazine, that feature the royals like once a month. Man, it's
yeah,
crazy, and
yeah.
Americans just eat it up. They love it. Um, but are the is the royal family that that much? Does it receive that much focus by people from London and from England? Do y'all
Oh,
have this?
yeah.
Okay.
Yeah, it has a big following. The royal family is still running at a good late 60s, say 68% popularity.
Wow.
And even, as the scandals come along, Harry and William and the scandals, I mean, that's all, people love it. If there's a big royal event, you get people camping out for 2 or 3 nights before to have a front row seat for when they're
Wow.
attending Westminster Abbey. Yeah.
Wow. And so for those, I want to ask you two follow up questions about that. So for those special occasions, how does that affect your job as a cab driver? Is it just
Oh, yeah.
gridlock and you can't do anything, or you manage to navigate around?
Yeah, so these events are well advertised, but yeah, heavy road closures, because we live in a time where security is a big thing.
Yeah.
So yeah, heavy road closures, but you know, it's just part of London. We accept it. We might have a little moan to the next cabbie sitting next to us, but we live with that. It's what makes us a little bit unique in London.
Sure. Well, I have a feeling that people who are listening to this episode from Washington D.C. can relate.
Yeah,
Every once in a while, you just get stopped by a motorcade, and then let it
yeah,
go through. The president's got to go somewhere, and then
yeah,
you're back to normal, right?
yeah. It's the same thing. Yeah.
And so, what
But
about the reverse? Do you ever get a chance to give a ride to a member of the royal family? Obviously, not William or Kate, but is the royal family big enough that you're like, oh yeah, this is the Duke of this, or
yeah,
some member of the family
so
like that?
well, there is the Prince and Princess Michael of Kent, and so uh, Prince Michael of Kent lives at Kensington Palace, and I picked him up definitely twice, maybe on 3 occasions, and I know other cabbies that have picked him up. So he's definitely a cab user, but I wouldn't say the more senior, royals have got their own vehicles and their own security. So
Well,
yeah,
because of security, I imagine,
yeah,
right? Yeah, that's cool. Well, so the next thing then is, what about places outside of the ones that are popular in the first visit? Where are some things? What are some things that you recommend people seeing when they go to London that might not otherwise be top of the list? That you think, well, this is
yeah.
something that
So
you really get a sense of London if you go do this or see that.
well, a pub. You need to go to a pub, yeah, and meet some real Londoners and have some pub grub. We call it pub grub, pub food. So you've got pubs that are, 350 years old. So even
Wow.
the pub is, full of history. Um, so yeah, definitely pubs. I would say you can go off the beaten path and, look behind the big famous buildings that you all know. learn a little bit more about maybe the legal quarter. There's some great history there dating right back to the 1400s, and some buildings and architecture dating back to the 1400s. Yeah, there's a couple of things there.
That's cool. Rebecca and I got a chance to go, I think, with about 1 million other people on a Saturday morning, shop for Christmas presents at Harrods. And
Yeah.
man, that place was packed. Is it always busy in that neighborhood? Knightsbridge, I think, is.
I'm going to say like 99% of the year. There
Wow.
might be the odd day, which is probably Christmas Day,
Mm.
where it is quiet, but it's always busy. It happens to be the largest shop. I mean, you guys would probably refer to it as a shopping mall. We call it a department store because it's got lots of departments in the building. Over 300 departments, over 7 floors. So it is the biggest shopping mall or department store in Europe.
Wow, isn't that something? And
Yeah.
so, what on a typical day like that, are you carrying people around who are doing shopping and just kind of going around and doing errands like that, or is it more the nature of kind of the bigger events? What's your day look like typically?
Well, my day will be, especially it's kind of changed really since I've, qualified as a tour guide. So it might be I do a tour in the morning, and that's usually 9 a.m. to 1 p.m.
Mm.
And then if I drop them somewhere in the central zone, I may do a couple of street jobs. We call it a street job, somebody putting their hand up. And that can take you anywhere. Stations, shopping malls, home, if they're going home, they've had an early day.
Hmm.
Or you might pick up some more tourists, and then, I sort of impress them a little bit and give them a little bit of conversation, even though they're just going maybe back to their hotel. They've been out and done a bit of sightseeing.
Right.
Yeah,
That's so great. Well, and
yeah,
so on a day like that, you and I and Rebecca spent a few hours together touring London. And at the end of the day, I mentioned that I had written this book, The Christian Capitalist, which is all about hard work and giving generously to the poor and needy in the name of Jesus. And I never will forget the look on your face because I asked you, hey, you really know a lot about history. Can you point me in the direction of some folks who have done that, who give generously to the poor and needy? And you just got the grin that you got right now and started talking to me about the charity that you and the other cab drivers or
yeah.
taxi drivers in London have started. So I want to ask you about that. First of all, tell us a little bit about the Magical Disney Taxi Tour. It's such a fantastic name and a great cause. Tell us a little bit about
Yeah.
that.
So on the bumper sticker and on the PR stuff, you'll notice that it's got a slightly longer title. So it's the Children's Magical Taxi Tour from London to Disneyland Paris.
Mm.
It started in 1994. So last year was the 30th anniversary, and this year's trip in September will be the 31st trip. And every year, London cabbies, around 100, sometimes 110 taxis, take children that are suffering with illnesses. They could be chronic and debilitating, and they can be life-threatening as well.
Hmm.
And so we take them from London, from the hospital. So we get up at 4 in the morning. We pick these kids with their families up at 5:30 a.m. We take them to a place out to the east of London called Canary Wharf, where we have a big breakfast. And a few important people, like the Mayor of the City of London and some others, will get up and make a little speech. Once we've all had a breakfast, then we set off in the taxis. So roughly 100 taxis, but as well as that, you've then got the City of London police escort, the French
Wow.
gendarmerie come over, and you've got the French gendarmerie escort. You've got the London ambulance service that bring 3 or 4 vehicles because, these children have got chronic illnesses and they
Sure.
wouldn't be able to undertake this trip on their own without the backup of the London ambulance service. Then you've got the AA tow trucks and mechanics, just in case, one of the vehicles has an issue and they
Right.
can keep us rolling. So it's a massive convoy of people that are all volunteers. Everybody's unpaid. Everybody's given their time for these children to just have a great weekend and hopefully put a smile on their faces, which usually happens every time.
Oh, I'll bet. And just the thought of this convoy of 100 London taxis plus police from London and France, the tow trucks, the ambulances, that must be a massive undertaking.
Yeah, it really is. It's a difficult job for the police, really, because we don't stop. We keep rolling. So on the freeways, the motorways, they keep the junctions blocked while we roll through. And when the convoy is rolling, it can stretch between 3 and 5 miles long. And from the first vehicle to the last vehicle, you're talking about a 20 minutes difference.
Yeah.
So it is massive, and they keep us rolling. They do a great job, the police.
Isn't that something? Well, that sounds like the extreme of the motorcade I was just talking about in Washington,
Yeah,
D.C., right? Just like
yeah, yeah.
getting
We've
caught
got a
by a train.
longer, yeah, we get a longer motorcade than Donald Trump.
Exactly. All right. So I got all kinds of questions about this for you, Greg, because it's such
Sure.
a wonderful experience. First of all, how did you get started with this charity?
Yeah, so I was introduced to it by another cabbie friend who'd done the trip, and he just over coffee. Oh, have you heard about this trip? And so I looked into it and managed to get on the trip. It is organised by the Worshipful Company of Hackney Carriage Drivers, that are an ancient organisation, and they're a city livery company. Now, the city livery companies, they're sort of their 21st century, if you like, rules of thumb are fellowship, education, and charity. And so this is the Hackney Carriage Drivers Charity, is taking these kids on the trip that's been running 31 years. So I became a member, and I've now been on 8 trips, taken 8 families, which all keep in touch. They have such a great time that they tend to keep in touch, especially coming up to when the trip is. They say, "Oh, you're taking another family this year. Have a great trip."
I
Yeah,
love that. Oh, I love that. All right, so let's go back to the organization that sponsors this,
yeah.
Worshipful Company of Hackney Carriage Drivers. What does Hackney mean?
Yeah, so in the days when taxis were horse-drawn, carriages with horses, there was a fairly small horse that had a slow gait, and it had I'm going all the way back to when French was even spoken in London, and
Whoa.
it's a hackney, so it is a French word, and this horse, was just gave a smooth ride in a carriage. It had a slow gait, so it didn't. It gave as comfortable as it could be in a horse and carriage, but it gave it a comfortable ride. So it goes all the way back to there. We were, as licensed taxis, we were licensed by Oliver Cromwell in 1654. So that does make London taxis the oldest licensed public transport system in the world.
Yeah.
And we've been licensed ever since.
Isn't that something? And so, what makes the license by Oliver Cromwell? That on its own is a whole history lesson, isn't it?
Yeah, yeah.
um, Greg, what makes the company of Hackney Carriage Drivers worshipful? Is this a religious organization?
Yeah, so these are city livery companies. Now, there's about 112 livery companies, and they've been around for good 900 years. Some of the oldest ones. They began as a group of people working in the same trade that wanted to measure standards, ensure that customers got a good quality product, and they all tended to congregate at a particular church. So this is where the term worshipful comes in.
Gotcha.
Later, the term livery comes in, because livery is the clothing that you get clothed in when you become a member of these livery companies.
Oh, okay.
So it began as a worshipful company. Everybody in that particular trade, let's say bakers, they would have worshipped at a particular church in the city of London. And you get all sorts of trades, some that are lost now. The trade doesn't carry on, but they've been around for this 800 years, and they've got a big charitable. They own property. They might not be in the trade that they began in, but the income from the property goes to charity. These 112 livery companies, they give out £50 million to charity every year.
Wow.
Yeah.
Isn't that
And
something? So that makes so much more sense now when I asked you Hey, can you tell me about people who have been charitable in London? Literally, America can't match that. A charity that's been around giving away 50 million pounds just in last year, but that's 900 years old. Good
Yeah,
grief.
yeah,
I, that's
yeah.
amazing.
So yeah, I mean, yeah, I suppose in its most basic form, it began as like a trade union, let's
Hmm.
say,
Hmm.
and yeah, and developed from there.
But organized around a church, or at least that was its
Yeah,
initial meeting point, because that's really one of the core concepts of being a Christian capitalist. That when we go to work, we glorify God through our work, right?
yeah,
Because we recognize that everything we have is a blessing from Him, including the work that we get to do.
yeah,
And I can tell that the work that you do through this tour to Disney is a blessing to you, just like it is to the kids that you carry. Can you
yeah,
tell us a little bit about that? How that makes you feel to undertake
yeah,
this every year?
yeah. So when I first got involved, um, you think, well, what is this all about? And the other driver that was sort of introduced me to it. But when you actually, meet these families, so early in the morning on a Friday morning, and then you spend the weekend with them as the host, um, and you meet them on the Friday morning, and they're sort of, it's a little bit chilly in London maybe, and they're crouched up and they're a bit nervous. And then you do the journey out there, and then you spend the next day in the park, and these kids just bloom. And so it's just humbling.
Yeah.
It's just humbling to see all the smiles and all the happiness that they get from the weekend. It gives them a break from these kids are going through lots of therapy. The hospital staff choose the children at a time when they might be in between therapy so that they're not going to be hopefully too sick on the trip. There has been, some children that have suffered when they've been there, but generally everybody has a great time, and you just come away thinking, yeah, I've really given something back there, and it's just a great thing to be part of.
Isn't that wonderful? So where
Yeah,
we left off in the trip was the convoy that can go 3 to 5 miles long.
yeah.
How do you, for your average American who knows about the English Channel and knows about England and France, how do you drive to France?
Right, so this is all part of the charity. So there's a ferry company called P&O Ferries,
Hmm.
and they provide us with the crossing. So we drive on to a big ferry boat, all of us together, making lots of noise so that everybody around knows that we're arriving, bibbing, and the children have got the windows down and waving, and we've got all the charity sponsors adverts all over the taxi, and it's very good. P&O Ferries have supported this charity for all that time now. So we get the crossing from a place in Kent called Dover.
Hmm.
Many people might have heard of the White Cliffs of Dover.
Sure.
And we take the ferry across to Calais. And
Hmm.
then from Calais, we're joined by even more French gendarmerie, and we carry on the convoy all the way to Disneyland Paris.
And how far is Disneyland Paris from Calais?
Well, the thing is, in a convoy of that size, it actually, if you was doing the journey on your own in a single car, you'd probably do it in maybe half the time. So we get off the ferry at something like midday, 12 midday. We don't get to Disney until about 7 in the evening.
Oh,
Um,
wow.
but we but we do make rest stops.
Hmm.
And one of another big support is a village in France where we fill up the taxis with fuel, and the children get a rest stop. And the local villagers to this service station that's just off the freeway, all the local villagers come out and they give the kids free face painting. They bake cakes. They
Oh,
dress
that's
up as
great.
characters, and they've been doing that for years as well.
What's the name of that village? Do you recall?
Yeah, it will come to me in a minute. I knew you was going to
I
ask
don't
me
want to
that.
put you on the
Um,
spot. I just want to mention that. We'll put it in the show notes. Well, because this is something that I
yeah,
have a feeling Americans will want to see either on the British side or on the French side. You know,
yeah, absolutely.
I don't want to put
Um,
you on the spot, brother.
yeah, yeah. I'll get it up. I've got it here somewhere. And
You and I are too
considering
young to
I've
have
stopped
senior
there,
moments.
yeah. Considering I've stopped Assavilliers. I've got it.
Esavilios. All right.
Yeah,
Esavilios. That's
Yeah,
beautiful, and I love the way that the people of the village come out and support the convoy. That's just
it's
wonderful.
brilliant. It's brilliant. They have a band there, so lots of music, lots of laughter there. It's that one is a big surprise for the families because they don't necessarily know what to expect. The hospital staff would have given them a briefing, we're going to Disney for the weekend, but these little bits, these little extras, like with the villagers coming out, really blows people away.
Isn't that something? And so,
Yeah,
where I want to ask you about how the hospitals choose the patients and the families in just a minute. But when y'all
yeah.
get to Disney Europe, what is it? Disneyland Europe, right?
Or Disneyland Paris.
Disneyland Paris. When you get to Disneyland Paris, do y'all all stay in the same hotel?
Yeah. So, just like Disney in the States, they've got these theme hotels. So we literally take over a couple of blocks. It's the Cheyenne, the Cheyenne Hotel.
Okay,
And then you've got the Yellow Rose canteen where we all have dinner, buffet style dinner and breakfast. So yeah, when you first get there at 7, it's been a long day for the kids. So it's a quick bit of dinner in the Yellow Rose. They'll go off to bed and we'll just arrange to meet in the morning for breakfast. And then we get half an hour extra in the park before it opens to the general public. So we get in there. All of the kids get a fast pass, so they
that's
get,
great.
yeah, they get to sort of get on the rides that they want to get. Uh, yeah, yeah, it's good
That's
fun.
great. Well, I love the fact that you stay at the Cheyenne Hotel and the Yellow Rose Cafe. Those are American
Yeah,
references. That's
yeah,
awesome.
yeah,
Greg, I had the misfortune when I was in high school of driving to Disney with my family from Washington D.C. It's a 15-hour trip, and I was 17, 18 years old, and sat in the back of a very small car. And when I got to Orlando, I could barely move. My knee
yeah,
was swollen to the size of what you
yeah,
would call a football. I
yeah.
got an X-ray; there was no problem. But we were there to go to Disney World, and I was in a wheelchair. And my
Right.
younger brother was at the time much lighter than me. Still is very light compared to
Hmm.
me. But it was a huge effort for him and our friend Greg, who was a wiry, kind of slight guy. It was a huge effort for those two dudes to push me around Disney World in the
Yeah,
heat in Orlando in a
yeah,
wheelchair.
yeah,
So, what does that look? How do you navigate the park with these kids who I imagine many of them have mobility problems?
yeah, yeah. Many are in wheelchairs and have those mobility problems. My first family, which was in 2018, um, to get on the ride, I needed to lift him out of the wheelchair. And although we had the fast pass, there's still a small queue, going onto the ride. So I
Yeah,
was carrying him and then going into the rides, and yeah, that was quite physical. I wasn't really used to that. Um, but
exactly.
um, but these kids just come to life. They find an energy that perhaps they haven't had for the last few weeks while they've
Yeah.
been under therapy. So yeah,
Well, it sounds like it's inspiring to them and to you.
yeah.
So that's interesting. So you not only host them in terms of getting them to the park, but you stay with them during the visit to the park.
You spend the whole weekend with the family. They're essentially your family for the weekend.
Gotcha.
And so you usually get 3 people in your taxi. So you'll have the child that's got the illness, and then they'll bring a sibling or a friend, and then they'll bring a parent. So, and 90% of the time it's a mum. Dads come as well. And then there are some children that need a carer to come because of their conditions.
Sure.
And
Sure.
then you literally, when you meet them at like 5 in the morning near a London hospital, I always generally pick up at the same hospital in Whitechapel in East London. From 5 o'clock in the morning on Friday morning until you drop them home at like 8 in the evening on Sunday, you spend the whole time with them. Apart from
Wow.
when you're sleeping you're in
Yeah.
separate rooms and yeah,
Isn't that something? So Friday to Sunday evening. Now, Greg,
yeah.
so does Sunday start with another breakfast or a worship service before y'all get on the
Yeah,
road back to London?
yes, Sunday is another breakfast, buffet style breakfast, and then you get a big surprise for the kids because where we park behind the hotel, the police would have set up all their vehicles and all their equipment, And so I always say to my children, right, let's get this, or my family, let's get this breakfast done, because I've got a surprise for you in the car park, in the car lot. And then they get to put on the policeman's hat. They use the riot baton, and then they get on the vehicles, on the police motorcycles. They show them how to turn the siren on, or
Oh,
rev
that's great.
yeah. And that is a very noisy morning. And then that attracts people that are in the Disney park to come and see all these kids. Yeah, that's just brilliant. Yeah, getting access to the police vehicles. French as well, the French motorbikes, and the AA, the tow trucks, putting on the orange flashing lights rather than the blue lights.
Right.
So yeah, they have a good time in the morning now. And
Kids
then
love that.
it's the long drive back on the Sunday.
Yeah.
So it is quite a quick trip. They get all day in the park Saturday. Then we're in the New Yorker hotel for a gala dinner and a bit of a dancing. We have some music and some lights, and they have a bit of a dance and a bit of a party, really, after having a gala dinner. But then it's, so Friday is all day traveling. Sunday is all day traveling, really.
Mm-hmm.
And a full day in the park on Saturday.
And the gala on at the New Yorker on Saturday night.
Yeah.
I'll bet a lot of those kids are fast asleep on the way back to England.
Yeah. And, that does happen. Although, like I say, they're still so sort of, I don't know, energized and buzzed up from such a great weekend. Yeah. But yeah, eventually they do have a good sleep in the back.
And a big weekend for you too. Do you take that Monday off when you get home?
I made the mistake on the first year of trying to go to work on the Monday, and I've soon quickly realised that you need a good day to get over that.
That's great. Well, I appreciate you getting into all those details for us because, as a tour guide, not only have you given us just a great description of this trip, but it sounds like there are lots of places where our listeners could get involved in support, whether it's on the London side, the Disneyland Paris side, or in between in Alsavillos. That's just wonderful. Yeah. So this is a huge effort, and it happens in September. Do families apply to be able to go? Like in America, we have the Make-A-Wish Foundation. Is that how it works in England?
No, it doesn't quite work like that. So the network is there with the particular hospitals. So 5 or 6 hospitals, nearly all in London, but we have a couple outside of London, another big city called Birmingham. Mm-hmm. And it's all down to the medical teams that are treating these children to choose the right time. So, like last September, my child was due to go on the year before, but then, had a relapse and wasn't available. And so, they really tried to make sure that the kids are in as best shape as they can so that there's no issues while we're traveling, even though we've got the ambulance and the medical staff there to deal with stuff.
Sure.
I did have one year where the child had severe epilepsy. And I think there was a bit of at the gala dinner, there's lots of flashing lights and the disco. Oh. And he did have an episode, and so we needed the medical staff on that occasion. So it's really down to the hospitals. The hospitals know when it's the right time for the kids, and they put the kids forward.
Gotcha. And so there's no cost. You and I talked about this in London. There's no cost to this for the families. How can we help support the magical tour?
Yeah, so it's fully funded by fundraising and donations. And so we've got our website page that will take you to the Just Giving donation page. So the taxi website page is all the W's, magicaltaxitour.com. Mm-hmm. And then there's a button on there that just says Just Giving, please donate. So anybody that wishes to give something, I can honestly say that it's one of the charities that I obviously work very closely with. All the money goes to the kids having a good weekend. Everybody else is a volunteer. So that money, the cost of the transport, the hotel accommodation at Disney and the dinners and the food, and that's all covered by the sponsorship. And so we do need that sponsorship. Sure. And that donation.
Are there any other fundraisers during the year, or is it primarily driven by donating through the year at the website?
Primarily, but you do get individuals that will then do maybe run the London Marathon for the charity,
Oh, wow.
or climb Mount Snowdon for the charity. I did in 2016. I was captain of the Golf Society that year, so I did a fundraiser on a golf day, and we raised £7,500 on a golf day.
Wow.
Yeah, I had an auction. I got a lot of people to donate stuff for the auction. I had a lot of generous people there that, bidded on these items, sports shirts that have been signed by the sportsmen and
Right.
stuff like that. And so that went very well. And so, yeah, things like that. But
Yeah.
it is largely, donations on the Just Giving.
Isn't that cool? So that's another thing Americans and British have in common. We love a good golf tournament fundraiser and
Yeah.
auctioning off stuff.
Yeah.
That's outstanding. Well, Greg, you mentioned that the Disney Tour is one of the charities you support. Are there any others that you'd like our listeners to know about?
Yeah, so the taxi trade, for all of that time, 360 odd years history, have always been a benevolent bunch. So there are a couple of charities that are older, veterans trips to France, to places where they might have fought during World War II. And then, we have Remembrance Day, which is the closest Sunday to the 11th of November, which is the same as Veterans Day, big remembrance service. And so we have a thing called poppy cabs. And the poppy cabs take all of the veterans to and from the stations to the remembrance service, which happens near Whitehall, right near Big Ben. And then we wait around, and then after the service, we take them all back again. So that's just, just a couple that I can think of. There's quite a few. There's another children's one that does trips within the UK, just to local zoo, for underprivileged children. Slightly different, but for underprivileged children. So we're just a benevolent bunch, the taxis. In our day-to-day work, there is a hospital in London called Great Ormond Street. Now, this does deal with children that have got serious conditions. And so it's kind of an etiquette or an unwritten rule that if you're at a station and somebody's, asked to go to Great Ormond Street and you realise, that the children might be unwell, we normally give this ride for free. Cabbies don't charge for these rides. So that's on a day-to-day basis.
I love that.
Giving free rides. Yeah.
Yeah, I love that. And I love the description of the members of the taxi trade as a benevolent bunch. That's just beautiful, because it underscores the concept of being generous with what you have, even if we're not talking about money. If you've got a cab and you can give generously through that by giving a free ride to a child or a family to a children's hospital, that is exactly the point. I just love it.
Absolutely. We're hard working. Driving a cab has always been long, hard hours, but we've all recognised that giving back, is also the right thing to do.
I love it. And Greg, I was going to ask you the kind of the final question we always have on the show is, what does it mean to be a Christian capitalist? I think you just hit the nail on the head.
Yeah.
I love it.
Yeah.
Well, thank you so much for joining us today. We sure do appreciate it, and I've loved hearing your stories about the magical taxi Disney tour to Disneyland Paris, and about your work as a taxi driver in London. For those of you who are listening, hey, look up Greg Smith. All of his information will be on the show notes at the time we publish the podcast. And Greg, we look forward to seeing you again soon. Thank you so much for joining us today.
Thanks, Rich. That was great. Thank you.
It's a lot of fun. Have a great day. And remember, on the Christian Capitalist, the more we make, the more we give. We'll see you soon, Greg.
Cheers.
Cheers.